And thank you for that nice intro. I'll do my best to kind of break down the coverage area of next generation internet, and more specifically virtual worlds. Going back almost 2 years, this has been a big focus area for us as we've seen this shift to online spending and online time spent continue to increase, and was really only exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we think some of those trends that were in place before, while they were accelerated through the pandemic, we think those are going to stay, and those trends and those trend lines will stay. So I'm happy to kind of walk through ours last year, which is where this idea of virtual worlds and understanding that there is this shift happening on the internet, where more traditional platforms and there's this just movement towards more interactive and more social platforming. And so I'm happy to, if we want to pull up the slide deck, just kind of jump right in and walk everyone through kind of the way that we've bucketed out the different virtual worlds, and really understanding that the primary bucket, or the biggest component of virtual worlds today, what we think is of traditional gaming. And so games today, or historically, have been multiplayer platforms where they have been social in nature, but it was more specifically you played a game to just play the game. And we think what's happening today, which has been this kind of seismic shift underneath the traditional gaming space, is this idea that game platforms are becoming the next social platforms. And this really fits into this idea of virtual worlds, right? It's not just a game that you log on to and you play with your friends. It's somewhere you actually go and spend time and you hang out, and that's really the biggest component here. And as you'll see, we have this $175 billion market in the gaming space, and we think that there's going to be a tremendous amount of growth there over the years. And then the next two components we'll get into in this presentation are augmented and virtual reality. And I think these are, in a way, their own virtual worlds, or will result in new virtual worlds. But they're also gateways. They're gateways to access current virtual worlds that maybe pop up in your mind today, and stuff we can't even imagine yet. So if we can go to the next slide, we'll just kind of get into I think the history and understanding what's happened in the gaming space that has kind of led to this moment, to where we are today, and at a point where we're starting to see explosive growth in gaming. And so understanding, if you go back 10, 15 years, the primary method of monetizing games has always been pay to play. So you spent $60, $70 on a CD, you went home, you popped it in either your PC or your console. And over the last 10 years, as we've gotten mobile, and as the cost to create games has come down very significantly, we've shifted from pay to play and now free to play. And free to play is a bit of a misleading term, but it's understanding that you don't have any upfront costs in the game, and the way that developers monetize is actually on the back end. So the game is let out, it's free, anyone can download it, but then you may spend money within the game. So you spend it on virtual goods. And this can consist of pretty much anything you can imagine and put into a game. I think one example I like to give is Fortnite, which is a free-to-play game, but most people will either sign up for a subscription, which allows them to get rewards as they play. So that costs anywhere from $10 to $15, or they'll actually spend money on dressing up their avatar and changing the way their avatar looks. And those are all consistents of virtual goods. Even in-game currency, we categorize as virtual goods. And so as this shift has happened, what we think has resulted from that, as we've gone from really 20% of the total spend on gaming from just those virtual items to now 75% of the market. So you can think of about 75% of a $175 billion market is now that revenue is being generated from free-to-play games. Again, very counterintuitive because of that name with the term free in it. But it's really, really important to understand this shift because it's going to lead to what we think is continued growth in the gaming space. And this is because you can more efficiently match demand from consumers. So if we can go to the next slide here, just understanding that historically, again, this pay-to-play methodology has essentially cap the amount of money that you can earn on a game. Someone can only spend $60 to $70, but if they're a hardcore gamer, there's someone that plays this game 2-3 hours a day, there could have been in the past a way to monetize that in steps. And now with free to play, there is a way to consistently monetize users as they continue to play the game. And so that's why we like to break out this number, which is this cost per hour number. So it's how much does a developer or how much does a game earn as a user plays for 1 hour. And we've given you kind of this example and compared it to other platforms. You can look at newspapers and cable, kind of old world, how they've monetized. And then you can look at social media platforms, music, gaming, SVOD, AVOD, which stands for subscription video on demand, and advertising videos. So you look at this new bucket and these new platforms, and they're actually considerably under monetized compared to newspaper and cable, kind of these legacy, very mature markets. And so when we look at this across all of these sectors, one, we think all of these have significant growth ahead of them, but specifically gaming within the next 5 years has about 20% increase in the amount of monetization developers can get in just an hour of play. So you have this component of the actual game going to be better monetized over an hour's time. And then if we go to the next slide, this other trend that's happening at the same exact time is the amount of time actually being spent playing games. So you have the amount that you can charge, or how much you're pulling out of the ecosystem in an hour. And then you have the amount of hours each user is playing, both increasing. And we think that as this happens, it's going to lead to 21% compound annual growth over the next 5 years. And so, as I had mentioned, 75% of that $175 billion market is due just to virtual items, virtual goods, all of this free-to-play gaming. So that results in around $130 billion in 2020. And we think that's going to grow at 21% over the next 5 years to $350 billion by 2025. And these are enormous numbers. If you were to just look at gaming across some of these other verticals, it's larger than music and TV combined on an annual basis. When you really start to break out these numbers, just to understand how large this market is and the amount of gamers, right? We don't typically get these kind of numbers, but there's around 3 billion people that play games on a daily basis. It's a massive market, and we think it's really only going to get bigger. And really, it's understanding, one, why is this going to happen? Well, I think, again, going back to kind of my prior comments, games are becoming more social in nature, so people are willing to spend more time. And it's not hard, intensive, very interactive time where you're playing a first-person shooter. That will drain a person. You can't spend 5-6 hours in kind of that intense competition without kind of draining the battery, so to speak. But when you're just hanging out with your friends, walking around in Fortnite, chatting with them, this is how you get to that higher amount of playtime, and being able to interact and communicate with friends in just a much more interactive world than maybe everyone on this call is used to or is playing in these games. When I was younger, I would run home from school, I would hop on AIM, which was kind of just text messaging on the computer, and that was it. And now what kids are doing they're running home, they're hopping on Fortnite, they're walking around these virtual worlds, they're going to concerts, they're doing all of this within games. That has just a massive opportunity when you really start to break out and start to feel what games are becoming. It's just such an interesting time. So we can jump to the next slide here. I think I hope I painted a good enough picture of what we think games are going to be. And so just to kind of touch on these other two, AR and VR, I think one, in understanding both of these, it's very, very early. Even though AR and VR, it seems like every other year, oh, this is the year it's going to take off. This is the year that VR is going to take off. This is the year AR is going to take off. But understanding that these are computing platform shifts. Once these hit, as we like to say, once these really catch on with mainstream consumers, this will be equivalent moments as kind of the iPhone or the smartphone. You can think of AR, so these mobile glasses, as the next step in mobile computing. So there's going to be a day, I say this definitively, my compliance team would probably say don't, we probably have to add a we believe. So we believe, one day there's going to be a moment where we're no longer using mobile devices like smartphones. We're actually using mobile devices that look more like glasses. And we've seen progress here and there. Facebook has come out with some really interesting products. Snapchat has come out with some really interesting products. But understanding that at a mobile level, this is the next step. And AR, it really becomes a much more intuitive, a much easier use when it's hands-free, so not having to worry about the phone. And that's why we've broken out the market into two categories. We have kind of our projection of, what if or when, AR glasses begin to take off, and what is the market without AR glasses? Because, trying to feel out when this is going to happen is a very, very hard problem. So we've broken out the market into two pieces. You have the glasses pieces and the component there, and then just the phone. And you can see the difference in kind of the growth, right? If you were to just look away from this graph or just focus on the green portion here with just the mobile phone, that's a much smaller market than when you get to $130 billion with the growth of AR glasses. And again, just understanding very early, we're going to see a lot of interesting products. And I think, if you're curious and want to follow this space, companies that are really pushing here are Snapchat, Facebook, Apple, the big names that you've probably heard of when augmented reality is mentioned. So just understanding, this is the next mobile computing platform. Then the next slide, we get into the next at-home computing platform, because you're not going to be walking around with totally encapsulated goggles on your face. That would be quite tough to navigate around a busy city. But at home, what does this look like, and how can you enhance the experience? So I think imagine if this presentation was happening in kind of a virtual room, in a setting, in a virtual world. If it was happening in a virtual world where we were all strapped into goggles, and you could actually see my avatar right now, and I could see everyone on this call. That's the pitch for virtual reality. Beyond gaming, beyond anything, it's about bringing better human connection when we're all working remote, when we're all scattered across the globe. And it's understanding that one, again, very tough problem to solve, as is AR. And that companies are really starting to take a strong focus on virtual reality, because the tech is finally just starting to catch up with kind of our imagination. And I think it comes back to this chicken and the egg problem, because the software side of the problem has been, I think, there. It's if you've ever experienced VR, if you've ever had a chance to kind of play around, you'll see the graphics, you'll understand, wow, this is something that's just truly mind-boggling. And it really does kind of put you in a different world. But when you get to the hardware side, it's still very expensive to produce. The battery is short lasting. Some of the headsets are uncomfortable to wear for a long time. So what this slide is trying to understand is, and this is something we use, a metric we use across all of our research at ARK, is Wright's law. And so understanding, as more of these units are produced, what does the cost decline associated with that look like? So we went all the way back to the 1990s to understand, where was VR technology there? And then understand, if you could put this in, and this is going to get a little out there, but understanding, like, if you could get to a point where you kind of cross over this chasm of, understanding that you actually are in virtual reality, to a point where when you strap these goggles on, it feels as real as without the goggles, right? The virtual reality that it is putting in front of your face is just as real as something you would experience in your everyday life. And so trying to understand what is needed for that, and we have this internal formula called UVI. It's our unit of visual immersion, trying to understand, what is needed to reach that point of 100% visual immersion. So take out all of, the other four senses, just on the visual scale, how close are we to feeling like when I strap these goggles on my face, this is as real as it's ever going to be? And understanding, what needs to happen for us to get there. So we kind of project out two scenarios here. One is if you had smartphone-like adoption. So if you had billions of users adopting VR headsets, you'd get to that cost number much faster, and it would be at a much lower price point than if you had a game console-like adoptions, which is hundreds of millions of units being sold versus billions. And that's really what drives down this cost decline, and will allow us to get to that 100% immersion. Where we think we are today with the technology that we have, we think we're at about 10%. So, our forecast internally is we're going to get to 100%, or there's a chance of us getting to 100% depending on the different adoption rates. But where we're at today is 10%. And again, this is very hard. And I think the best way to follow this is really, again, to go to these companies that are pushing, and it's kind of the same companies I just mentioned on AR, which is Snapchat, Facebook, Apple, which we don't have too many details on Apple, but we, behind the scenes, we hear rumors. And so I think, again, just really understanding that both AR and VR, they're momentous shifts in human-computer interfacing, but they're also these gateways and will allow us to access new and different virtual worlds that we can't even really think of today. It's beyond our imagination. It's like trying to predict what the iPhone and the App Store would have become in 2008. We never would have thought of Uber and Lyft and Airbnb and all of these magnificent companies that have arisen out of the App Store. And if we can just go to this last slide, this is our total market projection on virtual worlds. And again, just understanding these three buckets. So when you take them as a whole, you have virtual reality and augmented reality at very, very, very small markets today. And this is just on the consumer side. We didn't dive too deep on the commercial side. There's definitely a market there. And there's some companies doing amazing stuff on the commercial side. We were more focused on the consumer side. And so when you break down just the consumer side of this, this is a market that's under $5 billion today, whereas you can compare it to gaming in this enormous market, which is at almost $175 billion. But when you combine these two and you look at the different growth rates that they're going to experience, one, I think, seeing 16% growth in a $175 billion market over the next 5 years is just tremendous. And the early reads we have on this year, especially in the US, is very, very strong numbers in that more mature gaming market. And then when you look at AR and VR, you had a number of different announcements with AR. Facebook just did a partnership with Luxottica, and then on VR, you had several different players, stepping into this space. I'll just use Facebook again. They came out with their Quest 2. This is their best-selling VR headset, and so that's why we see that much higher CAGR. One, you're growing it off of this lower base in this much less mature market. But when you kind of combine these two together, you get this $365 billion market by 2025. And with just so much growth and so much opportunity ahead of it, it's just a very, very exciting time, especially for me as an analyst to be covering this space, because it really is all happening right now. And it's truly amazing to watch. And maybe I can take some questions, George. I'm happy to answer anything. I know I just went on. I'm sure there are questions. I threw a lot at everyone.
Well, thanks so much, Nick, for those thoughts and painting a picture of the change that's taking place in our world. Maybe if you could touch a little bit on maybe the demographics of the people that are using. If we think about the global gaming, you use the reference of being kids coming home from school playing on the computer, but the size of the market that you're talking about, presumably this is going way beyond school kids. We're talking about generational participation.
Yeah, I think this is absolutely multi-generational, right? When you talk about 3.1 billion people in the world, this crosses all chasms. This crosses, every demographic. You can check the box, so to speak. I think one, because of the ability to access gaming, right? With most of other platforms, you usually have either you access through mobile, you access it through PC or some other device. But with gaming, you have access to it pretty much anywhere you have internet access. So it's there, it's in front of people. You can access it on your phone. Mobile is actually the largest market, but then you have console and then PC, which are both in their own right very, very large markets. So yeah, I do think I think it is multi-generational, and I think most demographics are playing games in some manner.
And do you think that also impacts then the you talk about the in-game spend? Unless kids have changed their incomes from when I was at school, they don't have the capacity to spend on games that maybe somebody who's in their 20s, 30s, 40s who are earning, that they might be happy to put discretionary spend into these sorts of platforms.
Yeah, I think kids are obviously capped at what their parents are willing to give them for games. I know that was certainly the case with myself. But I think because you start young playing games, you use it kind of as a learning tool. A lot. If you look at education as a whole, it has been gamified in some ways. There's a lot of gamification happening in many different sectors of the economy, and I think starting young, having played games, or when someone does play games at a young age, as they grow up, those hours spent, they stay with you. It becomes nostalgia. You grow up, you then get that disposable income, and you're willing to spend on games. And it's, when you look at, and I'll just kind of give this example in understanding, how this stays with someone as they grow up. If you look at the most valuable content IP in the world, I think most people would probably say Disney, Mickey Mouse, the Avengers, Marvel Cinematic Universe. But actually the most valuable content IP in the world is actually Pokemon and the Mario universe. And these come out of games, right? This is something that, 20 years ago, people were playing. And now today they're figuring out new and innovative ways to continue the game, to continue that universe. And so I think as you grow up, as you get the disposable income, you're willing to spend on something that has really just always been a part of your life.
Yeah. And one of the questions that's just come through relates to potentially the pushback from the sports or the fitness groups who are worried about hundreds of millions of their potential clients ditching that in favor of the armchair and a headset.
Yeah, I think that this is a really interesting, we haven't seen, I think a lot of what I've touched on in this presentation has been more on the, kind of just the recreational side of gaming. When you start to get into the professional side, this is a very, very small market, but with huge potential. As you speak, I think there are professional leagues today looking at esports and gaming saying, we're going to have to deal with this in a few years. And if you actually watch really closely and just Google some of the owners, I like to use the NFL as an example, but Google some of the owners of the NFL and you'll see that they already have made investments into different teams and esports. And it's really interesting to see them kind of hedging the bet, right? Like hedging the physical sports world versus the esports world. And you're even seeing in the US, I'm keeping this primarily US, but in the US, you're actually starting to see colleges as well offer scholarships and build out esports studios. And it's really becoming, I think as more people spend time and more people understand the market, that professional side of the sporting is really starting to emerge. And, I think that it's going to be one of the bigger trends over this, next decade.
Yeah. Now, other than just getting on this wave, if all that you're saying is going to come to pass, then that's a huge wave of growth and disruption and change. But in terms of investing in that, what are the companies that ARK are primarily looking at? You're looking at small players who are going to get taken over by the big guys, or are you primarily playing it through the major players?
I think when we, just taking a step back and understanding kind of the market as a whole, you have, the game developers, and there's a number of these, developers all over the world that are public companies. Where we've really tried to focus is at the platform level. So when you're looking at a developer, you're kind of you're siloed into a developer that's producing games, and if those games aren't hits, you have a bit of trouble. But when you get at the platform level, when you have multiple or hundreds or thousands of developers developing games for your platform, you have I think less risk, or less risk in a game flopping or a game not doing well. So we focused at the platform level, and Snapchat and Facebook, they have gaming on them. Unity is a platform for developers to create games. Roblox is a user-generated gaming platform. This is where a user with no code can actually go in, create a game, and then it's public. It's kind of like the YouTube of gaming. So there's a number of different ways, but when we've looked at the space and said, at the platform level, that's where a lot of the value is accruing, and that's where you have less risk relative to kind of siloed developers.
Okay, that's interesting. So, I mean, is there a parallel there between, say, take something like, say, Sky or one of those subscription services? They didn't care whether programs are going to be a hit or a flop. They just provided a platform where people could receive content. And now we've seen the likes of Disney streaming their own channel. You get Netflix streaming their own material, and it starts to. Do you think that some of the really successful gaming people will start to build their own platforms rather than being dependent on the likes of Facebook and others?
Absolutely. I think, we're starting to see that. And, one thing we didn't even touch on really, and this kind of gets to the Netflix and Disney Plus, but it's this idea of cloud gaming. And when do we have a service that looks exactly like Netflix? So something you pay $10, $15 a month for, but you have access to hundreds of different games. Because even though we talked about that 75% of the revenue being generated off of free-to-play games, there's still a very large market in premium games. So games you spend $60 to play up front. And I think there's a number of different companies. The best example I can give is Microsoft. Microsoft has what's called Xbox Game Pass. I believe they have around 18 million subscribers right now, and they're working on integrating cloud. Right now you pay, I believe it's around $15 a month, but you have access to hundreds of different games in a library. The way that you take it one step further when you add the addition of cloud is not having to wait for a lengthy download. So one thing that kind of plagues those services is you have to download hundreds of gigabytes of data, and if you're not playing consistently, it actually ends up being 20 minutes every time you want to play a game because you have to upload and update.
My old Spectrum days when you just had to put the cassette recorder in.
Right. Yeah. There's the bit of that lag there. Yeah.
Nick, we could chat for hours on this stuff, and we've not even touched on areas of regulation and carbon intensity of the digitization, all those sorts of things. So there's heaps of material, but unfortunately we've reached the end of our time. And we thank you for giving up something of your evening at 6 o'clock, coming on and chatting to us. Fascinating insights, and hopefully we'll hear from you again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm happy to come back and touch on everything that we didn't get to speak on today.
Magic. Thanks, Nick.